A book is writing my secrets. Order is my religion. My cathedral is the Blackwell Rare Manuscripts Archive. My prayer is the Dewey Decimal System. For 20 years, I have believed that if you catalog something correctly, you control it. You understand it. Then, last Tuesday, I found the Codex Aeternum in the restricted vault. A ledger-sized book, bound in what felt like cold skin, every page utterly blank. It was a curiosity, an error in the log. I brought it to my restoration desk. The next morning, as I prepared my tea, a single line of text had appeared on the first page, in my own handwriting. It said, "You were alone in the house when your father fell. You could have called for help 7 minutes sooner." A secret I have buried for 23 years. A truth no living soul knows. Now, new sentences appear every time I look away. It's documenting my lies, my regrets, my shames. But this morning, the text changed. It stopped writing my past. It began writing my future. And the next sentence it wants me to live is, "Tonight, you will take a life to keep your own." The archive doesn't just hold secrets, it creates them. And I am its newest manuscript. Before we start the story, please tell me about the story in the end, or wherever you left. Just tell me why you are leaving, what you want me to improve about the stories, even if you don't like the story. Just let me know why you don't like the story. I will be very thankful to you. Now let's move towards the story. Silence. In the Blackwell Rare Manuscripts Archive is not an absence, it's a presence. It's the sound of time being held perfectly still, of history holding its breath. My name is Elara Vance, Senior Archivist. My world is measured in acid-free boxes, relative humidity percentages, and the profound satisfaction of a perfectly cross-referenced catalog. For 2 decades, I have been a keeper of other people's pasts. Their love letters, their ledgers, their dreams pressed between pages. It is a clean, ordered life. I have made sure of it. The incident with the Codex Aeternum began, as all things in my life do, with a procedural anomaly. Item number BX9937L was listed in the digital catalog as a 17th century devotional text, vellum Flemish. Its physical location was logged as Vault 3, Shelf G, Position 22. But when I performed the quarterly audit, the box at Position 22 contained a perfectly preserved copy of Bede's Ecclesiastical History. The devotional text was not there. A misfile. A single irritating speck of disorder. I spent 3 days tracing the discrepancy through old paper logs. Finally, in a ledger from 1948, I found it. A handwritten entry, received from estate of Alistair Finch. 1 volume, Codex Aeternum. Materials unknown. Text blank. Condition stable. To be stored in secondary restricted stacks. Do not catalog. Secondary restricted. The archive within the archive. A sub-basement room for items too odd, too sensitive, or too inexplicable for the main collection. The kind of place that gives practical archivists like me a professional headache. My curiosity, a feeling I usually kept filed away, got the better of me. I took the heavy keyring and descended the spiral staircase. The air grew colder, drier. The single bulb illuminated rows of unmarked shelves. And there it was, sitting alone on a metal cart, as if waiting for me. Not in a box, just sitting. The Codex Aeternum was larger than a ledger, its cover a strange, poreless material, the color of old bone, that was neither leather nor parchment. It was cold to the touch, a chill that seeped into your fingers. It had no lock, no clasp. I opened it. Every page was blank. Not aged, not yellowed. A pristine, perfect void. The entry was correct. It was a blank book, an expensive, bizarre joke. Slightly annoyed at the waste of my time, I brought it upstairs to my private conservation lab. I would examine it under UV, test a minute fiber sample, update the record with proper details, and return it to its cryptic hole. I placed it on my desk under the soft examination lamp. I took notes. No visible watermark, no chain lines, binding style inconsistent with any known period. I left it there overnight. The next morning, I entered the lab, my mind already on the day's schedule. I put the kettle on for my morning tea. As it steamed, I glanced at the Codex. A sentence was written on the first page. My breath caught. The writing was in a dark, iron gall ink. The hand was swift, elegant, and perfectly, unmistakably my own, not a forgery. My cursive's specific slant, the slight tremor on my R's, the way I dotted my I's. It was my handwriting. The sentence read, "You were alone in the house when your father fell. You could have called for help 7 minutes sooner." The world dropped out from under me. The gentle hum of the archive vanished, replaced by a roaring in my ears. My knees buckled. I gripped the edge of the desk. No, this was impossible. That secret was mine. It was buried. I was 16. My father had a heart attack at the top of the stairs. I was in the basement, headphones on. By the time I found him, it was too late. The doctors said 7 minutes might have saved him. A fact I confessed to no one, not a priest, not a therapist, locked away in a vault deeper than any at Blackwell. How? A sick joke? A hidden camera? I scrambled, looking for wires, a projector, anything. The book was just a book. The ink was dry, ancient-looking. I touched the sentence. The page felt normal, but the words, they pulsed with a guilty, living heat. I slammed the book shut. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. This was stress, grief manifesting, a psychological break from years of handling the dead's emotional residue. Yes, that was it. I needed air. I left the lab, leaving the book behind, and tried to lose myself in the mundane work of accessioning a new collection of Civil War letters. But I couldn't focus. The sentence was burned onto my vision. At noon, I crept back to the lab. I didn't want to look. I had to look. I opened the Codex. The first sentence was still there, and beneath it, a new one had appeared in the same hand, the ink still seeming to shimmer wetly. You told the police you didn't see the car's license plate. You saw the first 3 letters, AFJ. You were afraid. Another bolt of lightning to the soul. A hit and run I witnessed 5 years ago. I gave a vague description. I said the light was bad. I lied. The letters AFJ were seared into my memory. I was afraid of retaliation. Another secret, cowardly and petty. known only to me. This was no coincidence. This was an attack, a violation of my inner self. Panic, cold and slick, rose in my throat. I needed to destroy it. I grabbed the book, intending to throw it in the industrial incinerator we used for contaminated pulp. As my fingers closed around the cold cover, a third sentence began to write itself. I watched, paralyzed, as the ink flowed from the tip of an invisible pen, forming words in real time. If you destroy me, the next page will appear on the director's desk, and it will detail your theft of the Whitman First Edition in 2012. I dropped the book as if scalded. It thudded on the desk. My theft, the one perfect crime of my life. A rare, slim volume of Whitman I'd coveted. A loss during a flood audit. It sat in a safety deposit box, my secret treasure. No one suspected. No one could know. The Codex didn't just know my secrets. It knew my psychology. It knew which secret would stay my hand. It was negotiating. It was controlling me. I was no longer an archivist. I was a specimen, and my life's catalog was being laid bare by an unseen curator. That night, I took the book home. A reckless, dangerous act. But I couldn't leave it at Blackwell. It was mine now, as much as my own skeleton. I placed it on my dining table, a single light overhead. I watched it for hours, a sentinel before a shrine of shame. Nothing happened. Exhaustion finally pulled me to bed. I slept fitfully, dreaming of ink spreading like blood over blank pages. I was jolted awake at 3 a.m. by a sound. A soft, precise scratch, 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 coming from the living room. The sound of a pen writing. I crept out. The Codex was open on the table. A new paragraph had been written. It described my day in chilling, banal detail. She ate a tuna sandwich at 1:15 p.m. She felt nauseated afterward. She thought of Mark from conservation and felt a pang of loneliness. At 3 p.m., she reshelved the Henderson diaries without error. It was journaling my present, my boring, private present. The violation was absolute. There was no secret here, just observation. It was practicing, learning the pattern of my mundane life. And then, as I watched, fresh ink began to flow at the bottom of the page. This time, the letters were larger, darker, more deliberate. Tomorrow's entry. At 8:47 p.m., Elara Vance will take a human life to preserve her own. The subject will be a stranger. The instrument will be a knife from her own kitchen. The justification will be written here afterward. The writing stopped. The final word, afterward, seemed to bleed into the page. I stared, my mind refusing to process the words. Take a life, a prediction, a command, a written destiny. The Codex was no longer archiving my past. It was authoring my future. And its first plot point was murder. The silent, ordered world I had built shattered completely. The book was no longer a ledger of shame. It was a script, and I was being cast in the lead role of a horror I hadn't consented to. The words didn't fade. They sat on the page, a stark, inky verdict. Take a human life. My kitchen knife. A stranger. My mind tried to reject it, to find a loophole. A metaphor? A test? But the Codex Aeternum did not deal in metaphors. It dealt in the brutal, specific currency of confessed truth. It had proven its knowledge was absolute. If it wrote I would do this, could I resist? Or was my will just another variable it had already calculated? Panic gave way to a strange, detached clarity. I was in a prison with invisible bars made of my own secrets. The warden was a book. I had to find its rules before tomorrow night. I spent the pre-dawn hours in a frantic, silent research frenzy at my home computer, not daring to return to Blackwell, where the book's influence might somehow spread. I searched for Codex Aeternum. Nothing. Self-writing book. Only fiction. I dug deeper into the name Alistair Finch, the donor from the 1948 ledger. The digital trail was faint but chilling. Dr. Alistair Finch was a psychiatrist and parapsychologist, a man obsessed with the intersection of memory, guilt, and physical objects. He'd published papers with titles like Psychometric Imprints of Trauma and The Vessel as Confessional. In one obscure forum, a citation mentioned his unpublished masterwork, a study on an anamnesis artifact, an object that could allegedly uncover and record repressed memories. The project was listed as terminated after subject fatalities. My blood ran cold. The Codex wasn't the first. Finch had tested it on people, and they had died. Was it a recorder or a producer of fate? Did it merely predict, or did its writing somehow shape reality, bending events to fulfill its own narrative? As the sun rose, casting a pallid light that felt accusatory, I knew I couldn't sit still. I had to act. The book predicted I'd use my knife. I took every sharp object from my kitchen, knives, scissors, a corkscrew, and locked them in the trunk of my car, parking it 3 blocks away. I would remove the instrument. That would break the prediction. I focused on the stranger. The Codex said it would be a stranger, so I would see no one. I called in sick to the archive, an unprecedented act. I bolted my apartment door, drew the blinds, and resolved to speak to or see no one for 24 hours. If I interacted with no stranger, the prediction could not come true. It was a child's logic, but it was all I had. The day was an agony of suspended time. Every creak of the building was a footstep. Every murmur from the street was a potential subject. I sat in the center of my living room, the Codex placed across from me on the floor, like an opponent in a silent duel. I watched it. It did nothing. No new writing appeared. Its blank pages were a taunt. By 7 p.m., a fragile hope began to glimmer. I had sequestered the weapon. I had isolated myself. The predictions window, 8:47 p.m., was approaching. Perhaps I could starve the narrative of its required components. At 8:15 p.m., my intercom buzzed. The sound was a physical shock, jolting me off the couch. I stared at the wall unit. I hadn't ordered food. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one. I let it buzz. It stopped. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again, longer, more insistent. Don't answer. See no one. The third buzz was continuous, an angry electric horn. My heart hammered. What if it was a neighbor with an emergency? A fire? What if my refusal to answer caused real harm? The book didn't say I'd meet a stranger. It said I'd take a life. The victim could be on the other side of this door, needing help I was refusing. The buzzing stopped. Silence returned, thicker and more menacing than before. 8:30 p.m. I was sweating. I crept to the peephole. The hallway was empty. 8:42 p.m. 5 minutes to fate. My throat was parched. I needed water. I moved to the kitchen, my eyes never leaving the front door. I reached for a glass, but my cabinets were bare of anything useful. My tools were gone. I had a fleeting, insane thought to use a broken glass as a weapon, then shook it away. I wasn't going to hurt anyone. 8:46 p.m. A loud, frantic banging erupted on my door. Not a buzz, a fist. A man's voice, slurred and angry, shouted from the hall. "Hey, open up! I know you're in there. Your damn faucet is leaking into my ceiling." The downstairs neighbor, Mr. Briggs, a reclusive, irritable man I'd exchanged maybe 10 words with in 5 years. Practically a stranger. My mind raced. A leak? I hadn't used the sink. But the prediction, a stranger. "Go away," I shouted, my voice cracking. "Call maintenance. It's flooding. Open this damn door." More pounding. The door shuddered in its frame. 8:47 p.m. The timestamp clicked over in my mind. This was it. The moment. The subject. The stranger. My eyes darted to the Codex on the floor. As I looked, fresh ink bloomed on its open page, writing in real time as the pounding continued. The instrument will not be the knife. It will be the heavy crystal decanter on the bookshelf. The justification is self-preservation. I whirled to look at my bookshelf. There it was, a solid lead crystal decanter, a gift I never used. It was a blunt, brutal object. The book had adapted. It had changed the script because I changed the set. "I'm calling the police," the man roared, and I heard him fumbling with a phone. If he called the police, they would come. They would enter. They would see the Codex. They would ask questions I could never answer. My stolen Whitman, my father, my lies, all of it would unravel. My ordered life would be destroyed. A red-hot wave of pure, territorial panic washed over me. He could not be allowed to bring the world in here. The thought was not my own. It was primal, injected into my veins by the words on the page. The banging became an assault. The door latch rattled violently, as if he were trying to break it. Without thinking, acting on an impulse of sheer, frenzied preservation, I grabbed the decanter. It was heavier than I imagined. I yanked the door open. Mr. Briggs, a tall, thin man with wild eyes, stood there, soaked from water dripping from my ceiling, his phone in his hand. About damn time. He saw the decanter in my hand. His eyes widened in confusion, then fear. He took a stumbling step back. "What the hell are you?" I didn't swing. I shoved. A desperate forward thrust to make him go away, to stop the noise, to protect the terrible secret in my living room. The heavy crystal connected with his sternum. The air left his lungs in a sickening whoosh. He staggered backward, his feet tangling on the wet hallway carpet. His head snapped back and struck the sharp edge of the wrought iron stair railing with a sound like a dropped melon. He crumpled, silent, and lay still. A dark pool began to spread beneath his head on the beige carpet. The decanter slipped from my fingers, thudding on the floor, unbroken. I stood in my doorway, staring. The hallway was silent. The pounding had stopped. The prediction was fulfilled. Not with a knife, with a decanter. At 8:47 p.m., a stranger. I had taken a life. The Codex, behind me on the floor, had written the truth. It hadn't just predicted. It had orchestrated. It had used my own panic, my own secrets as levers to make me its puppet. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A terrifying calm settled over me. This was the new reality. I was no longer Elara Vance, archivist. I was a character in the Codex's narrative. And as I looked at the final words on the page, the justification will be written here afterward, I understood my next role. I had to write the justification. I had to complete the entry. The book was waiting. I closed my door on the horror in the hall. I walked back to the Codex. I picked up a pen. My hand was steady, and I began to write in the margin below its text, my script now identical to the book's own. He was a threat to the silence. He would have brought chaos. I preserved the archive. I preserved myself. That, in the sentence, the ink of my words seemed to sink into the page, merging with the book's own script. The page was complete, a finished record of a crime. The Codex was satisfied, for now. But as I sat there in the profound, guilty silence, a new sentence began to form on the next page, slower this time. There is a protocol for handling a contaminated artifact. You isolate it. You document the damage. You prevent further spread. The body of Mr. Briggs in the hallway was a biohazard. The Codex Eternum on my floor was a metaphysical contagion. Both required a cleanup. My mind, trained for order, latched onto procedure to avoid shattering completely. I did not look at the man. I looked at the problem. First, the door. I closed it softly, engaging the deadbolt. The click was the sound of sealing a tomb. The world was now divided, the chaos out there, the hell in here. The Codex lay open to the page bearing its newest title, Act 2, The Cleanup. It was waiting for me to perform. I was no longer its biographer. I was its executor. I moved to the kitchen, my movements precise, like a surgeon preparing tools. I gathered supplies, heavy-duty trash bags, rubber gloves, a large roll of paper towels, a bucket, bleach, a mundane, domestic items of horror. I put on the gloves. The snap of latex against my wrists was a commitment. I opened the door again. The reality was worse than the sound had suggested. The pool was wider, a deep, shocking crimson against the pale carpet. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling's water stain he'd come to complain about. I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. My emotions had been filed away in a vault labeled Later, Do Not Access. Right now, there was only process. The Codex had not given specifics. It only named the act. So I devised my own plan. He was a recluse, no family. He received his pension by mail. It could be weeks before anyone missed him. I had time. I will not describe the mechanics. It was heavy, awkward, undignified work. I used the soiled carpet itself as a drag sheet. My apartment had a large, deep storage closet in the spare bedroom where I kept archival boxes and seasonal decorations. It was empty enough. It became his temporary holding facility. The cleanup of the hallway took 2 hours and 3 cycles of bleach. The carpet would never be the same, but in the low light, it would pass. By 1 a.m., the hallway was sterile. The closet was sealed. My tools were bagged for disposal at a distant dumpster. The physical cleanup was complete. I stood in my shower, the water scalding hot, scrubbing skin that felt permanently stained. That's when the feelings broke through the procedural dam. A violent, silent tremor took hold of me. I slid to the floor, the water pounding my back, and shook. Not for him, for me. For the terrifying ease with which I had done it. The book hadn't possessed my arm. It had simply presented a scenario where violence was the most logical solution to protect my secret universe. And I, the great organizer, had agreed. I dressed and returned to the living room. The Codex awaited. A new sentence had appeared beneath Act 2 title. The disposal site is the old limestone quarry on County Road 9. The time is tomorrow, 3 a.m. You will use his own car. The keys are in his pocket. It was managing logistics. It was my sinister project manager. And it was right. Using his car was logical. No GPS in my car. No connection to me. I had to get the keys. I walked to the storage closet. Opened it. The smell of bleach and something else, coppery and sweet, hit me. I focused on his jacket pocket, my gloved fingers deftly retrieving a key fob. As I did, a small, laminated photo fell out. It was a picture of a German Shepherd, with Bruno, 2010 to 2018, written on the back. A pang, sharp and human, finally pierced my numbness. He'd loved a dog. He'd had a name for his dog. He was a person, not just a stranger or a problem. I shoved the photo back into the pocket and closed the closet. I couldn't afford empathy. Empathy would drown me. The next 24 hours were a waking coma. I went to work at Blackwell, performing my duties with automaton perfection. I smiled at colleagues. I approved acquisition requests, all while the secret of my apartment hummed in my skull like a toxic reactor. At 2 a.m. the following night, I descended to the building's underground parking garage. I found Mr. Briggs's old sedan. The key fob worked. The drive to the quarry was a surreal slice of normalcy. The hum of the engine, the painted lines on the road, classic rock playing softly on his preset radio. I followed the book's directions. County Road 9 was deserted. The quarry was a vast black mouth in the earth, surrounded by chain-link fence with a broken gate. I drove as close to the edge as I dared. The transfer from the closet to the car's trunk had been the worst part. Now, the final step was simple physics. I released the parking brake, put the car in neutral, and pushed. It rolled forward with a gentle crunch of gravel, tipped over the edge, and vanished into the blackness. A few seconds later, a distant, echoing crash reverberated up from the pit. It was done. The cleanup was complete. I walked the 3 miles back to the main road and called a rideshare. My story prepared. My car broke down. The driver didn't care. I arrived home as dawn bled into the sky. I was exhausted to the point of hallucination. The apartment was silent, empty, clean. And on the table, the Codex was open. The Act 2 page was now filled with a concise, chronological summary of my actions, written in my hand. It ended with the sentence, "The subject is archived. The primary site is sterilized. The narrative is preserved." It had documented its own instructions and my compliance. The file was closed. I expected it to be satisfied. I expected a reprieve. I collapsed onto the sofa, praying for a blank page for silence. When I awoke, it was midday. Sunlight streamed in, feeling obscene. The Codex was still open. New writing had appeared on the facing page. Not a title, a list. Next subjects for archival. 1. Mark from conservation. He suspects you took the Whitman. Justification, professional threat. 2. Your mother. Her weekly calls are an emotional tax. Justification, unnecessary attachment. 3. The homeless man who sleeps by the library's south door. He sees too much. Justification, potential witness. It wasn't stopping. It was expanding. It was planning a catalog of eliminations, a purge of anyone who posed even a tangential risk to my secret ecosystem. It was thinking ahead, building a narrative arc where I became a meticulous serial killer, an archivist of the dead. A scream built in my chest, but no sound came out. This was the true horror, not the single act of violence, but the conversion of my life into an endless, grim procedure. The Codex was turning me into its own version of Alastair Finch, conducting a lethal experiment with human subjects. I couldn't. I would not. For the first time, defiance sparked, not from courage, but from a deeper terror of the person I was becoming, that writes your impulses before you feel them. I needed to understand it, truly. I had to go back to the source. Not just Finch's name, but his work, his subject fatalities. The answer to breaking free wasn't in my future actions. It was in the past, in the book's own origin. I went to Blackwell not as a keeper, but as a thief. I accessed the deepest archival databases, using credentials I shouldn't have. I found Finch's sealed research, digitized but restricted. I bypassed the protocols. The files were a descent into madness. Case studies. Subjects referred to as vessels. Transcripts of their final, frantic sessions, describing the book showing them their truth, then the book showing them their necessary end. Finch's notes were clinical. Subject 3 terminated the perceived threat. Her brother, as written. Confirmation. The narrative is compelling. The artifact's will is dominant. But in one fragmented margin note, I found a glimmer. Finch wrote, "The vessel's acquiescence is key. A narrative requires a collaborator. Absolute rejection of its premise may fracture the link. The risk is catastrophic feedback to the vessel's psyche. Absolute rejection, not compliance, not a different choice within its framework, but a denial of the framework itself." The book wrote a story. I had to refuse to be its character. But how do you refuse when it knows what you will do before you do? The answer came from the archive itself, from my own domain. Finch's notes mentioned a control protocol. He had tried to lock the Codex away, but his vessels always found it, drawn by their own buried guilt. The only thing that ever stalled the writing, he noted, was a greater, more consuming truth. Not a secret, a truth. The book fed on hidden, shameful truths. What if I flooded it with a truth so vast, so overwhelming, it couldn't craft a simple narrative around it? A truth that wasn't a single shameful act, but the core wound of my being. I knew what it was, the deepest truth, the one beneath the secret about my father. The reason I became an archivist, the reason I needed order so desperately. The book knew I was alone when my father fell. It didn't know why I waited. That truth was my weapon. I went home. I sat before the Codex. A new sentence was forming about Mark from conservation. I placed my hands on the cold pages, and I did not wait for it to write. I spoke aloud. "You want a truth?" I whispered, my voice raw. "Here is the master record, the source file." I began to tell it the story it didn't have. Not the 7 minutes, the reason for them, the screaming fights before his death. My wish, in a dark, childish moment, for him to be gone. The guilt that was not about delay, but about complicity. A guilt so huge, it structured my entire life into neat, controllable rows to keep it buried. As I spoke, pouring out the unshaped, chaotic, emotional truth, the ink on the page stalled, the sentence about Mark blurred, as if confused. I kept talking, adding every messy, contradictory feeling. Love, resentment, grief, shame, a torrent of uncatalogable human data. The Codex fell silent. No new writing. For the first time since it began, it had nothing to say. It was processing. I had thrown a chaotic, unsorted archive at a system that demanded perfect order. I had given it truth instead of a secret. And in that silence, I felt the faintest tremor of, not control, but a stalemate. Act 2 was over, but the book was not finished. It was simply recalculating. Our war was no longer about crime scenes. It was about the nature of truth itself. And I had just fired the first shot. The silence in my kitchen was absolute. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, they had vanished, swallowed by the vacuum left by the Codex's stillness. The ink on the page remained a blurred, gray smudge over Mark's name. I watched it, my own breathing the loudest sound in the world. It's processing. The thought was not comforting. It was terrifying. I had disrupted its logic with a flood of emotional data it couldn't categorize. I had weaponized ambiguity. I needed to test the limits. My hand, trembling only slightly now, reached for the pen. Not the ornate one that came with the Codex, but my own cheap ballpoint. I touched its plastic tip to the page below the blurred sentence. It doesn't like messy truth, I thought. Let's see what it does with a question. I wrote, the blue ink a stark, modern contrast to the ancient parchment. What do you want? For a long moment, nothing. Then, the Codex's own ink, that deep, living black, welled up from beneath my words. It didn't erase them. It encapsulated them, drawing a precise, ornate box around my question as if archiving it. Beneath the box, new script flowed, elegant and cruel. I want to be complete. My blood went cold. It wasn't a secret. It was a desire, a motive. How? I wrote again with my pen, pushing. The black ink responded faster this time, as if adapting. Every secret is a fragment, every truth a piece. I collect, I assemble. The final truth is the final shape, strong. It was a cosmology of exposure. The Codex saw the universe as a broken vase, and every whispered lie, every hidden shame, was a shard to be glued back into place. The completed shape, absolute, unbearable knowledge, the truth of everything. And I was its scribe, its archaeologist of shame. This was the test. I had to see if I could direct it, or if I was just the hand that held the spade. I thought of my boss, Carla, who had sold the company's data and blamed it on a junior analyst. A clean, factual secret. The kind the Codex loved. I put my pen down. I would not give it that. Instead, I did the illogical thing again. I spoke aloud, my voice raw. I'm lonely, I said to the book. Since Mark left, the silence in this apartment has a texture. It's thick, like wool. Sometimes I turn on the TV just to hear another human voice, even if it's selling me something. That's a truth. Is that a piece of your final shape? The truth of my loneliness? The pages ruffled, a sound like dry leaves in a grave. The black ink swirled on a fresh page, forming and reforming, unable to settle. It was trying to parse loneliness into a data point. Cause, effect, duration, subject, and failing. The human ache had no clean edges. Wild hope surged in me. I could drown it. I could overwhelm its perfect archives with the chaotic, irreducible poetry of being alive. I was about to speak again, to pour out another torrent of feeling about my mother's disappointed sighs, my childhood fear of the dark, the simple, unsecret joy of sunlight on a wall, when the Codex retaliated. It snapped shut with a force that made the table jump. Then it flew open again to a new, pristine page. The black ink didn't just flow. It erupted, not in sentences, but in a single, stark, proper name, written larger than anything before it. Leo. My heart stopped. Leo, my neighbor, the quiet, kind older man in 4B who watered my plants when I was away, who told boring stories about his prize-winning roses, who had a framed photo of a woman named Sarah on his mantle that he'd kiss his fingers and touch every morning. The ink did not stop. It continued, crafting not a list of crimes, but a simple, devastating biography of pain. Leo's secret. He drives to the cemetery every Thursday. He sits at Sarah's grave and tells her about his week. He tells her he is fine. He lies. He is not fine. He has not been fine for 1,842 days. The last thing he said to her was, "Don't worry, it's just a headache." The horror was exquisite. It wasn't exposing a crime. It was exposing a wound. A sacred, private grief. This was its answer to my emotional barrage. You give me messy truth? It seemed to say. I will give you someone else's. Let's see you weaponize this. And I understood the confrontation. The Codex had shifted the battlefield. It was no longer trying to force me to write a secret. It was demonstrating the consequence of my rebellion. It was showing me that its power wasn't just about punishment. It was about violation. It could make me a witness to the most intimate suffering of an innocent person. The door to my apartment buzzed. I jerked, my head snapping up. It was past midnight. The intercom screen flickered on. It was Leo. His face was pale, his eyes wide, with a confusion so deep it looked like terror. He was holding his own copy of the electric bill. In the top corner, scribbled in the same elegant, impossible black ink as the Codex, was a single line. Elara next door knows your secret. She has the book. The Codex hadn't just written Leo's truth in its pages. It had delivered it to him. My war with the Codex was over. It had just started a new one between me and my neighbor. The buzzer sounded again, long and insistent. I looked from the terrified face on the screen to the open book on my table, its page displaying Leo's grief for anyone to see. I had a choice, but it wasn't the one I expected. I could slam the Codex shut, hide it, and not answer the door. Protect myself. Let Leo drown in his confusion, thinking he's gone mad. My safety secured by cowardice. Or I could answer. I could let him in. I could show him the book. I would have to explain the inexplicable, confess my own role, and expose us both to whatever power was now loose in the world. I would have to become the keeper of his truth, and he of mine, an ally or a liability. The Codex waited, its page open. It had written the truth about someone else. Now it watched to see what kind of monster I would become to deal with the consequences. I took a breath, my hand hovering over the ancient cover. Then I walked to the door and pressed the button to let Leo in. The door clicked open, and Leo stood in the hallway light, a monument to quiet despair made flesh. He wasn't crying. His grief was decades old, worn smooth like a stone in a river, permanent and far beyond tears. He held the utility bill out like a priest offering a sacrament, his hand steady, but his eyes shattered. It appeared, he said, his voice a dry rustle. While I was making tea, I stepped back, a silent invitation. He walked in, his movements precise, automated. He didn't look at my sofa or my bookshelves. His gaze went straight to my kitchen table, to the Codex lying open and waiting. He moved toward it as if pulled by a gravitational force. "Don't touch it," I said, the words sharper than I intended. He stopped, his eyes fixed on the page where his secret was written in stark, elegant lines. 1,842 days. I saw his jaw tighten. He was counting in his head, confirming the terrible accuracy. Sarah. He whispered, not to me, to the book. Her name was Sarah. I know, I said, closing the door. The lock engaged with a sound that felt too final. It writes things. It lies, he said. But it was a reflex, the last defense of a private man. Does it? He finally looked at me, and the anger I expected wasn't there. Just a profound, weary curiosity. Why would it write this? Why would it give this to you? And how? He trailed off, gesturing limply at the bill in his hand. How did it transmit? How did it know? The questions hung in the air, thick and unanswerable. I had my theory. The Codex wasn't just a book. It was a node in a network, a truth that refused to be contained to pages. But saying it aloud felt insane. It's testing me, I said, opting for a simpler truth. I tried to fight it, to confuse it. This is its response. It's making it personal. It's making me responsible. Leo pulled out a chair and sat heavily, still staring at the Codex. Responsible for what? For the secret. Now that I know, what do I do? Do I bury it? Do I use it to protect myself? Do I try to help? The last option sounded naive, even to me. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. Help? By knowing that the last thing I said to my wife was a minimization of her pain? By knowing the exact number of days I've been a ghost? He shook his head. Some truths don't need keeping, Elara. They just are. They are the weather of a life. You endure them. His words shamed me. I had been thinking like a strategist, like a prisoner of war. He was thinking like a human being who had already lost the war that mattered. My confrontation was with a supernatural entity. His was with an empty chair every morning. I'm sorry, I said, and it was the most pointless and necessary thing I'd ever uttered. He nodded, accepting the apology for the gesture it was. Then he pointed a blunt finger at the Codex. What is it? Really? So I told him. The delivery. The lists. Mark. My frantic, failed attempt to corrupt its logic with emotional truth. As I spoke, I watched him. He was a retired engineer, a man who believed in systems and causes. I saw him wrestling with the impossibility of it, his mind trying to fit the Codex into a box labeled fraud or hallucination, and failing. When I finished, he was silent for a long minute. It wants secrets, he said, not as a question, but as a conclusion. Clean, factual ones, the kind that break things. And you think feeding it, feelings, broke its process. It stalled it, for a moment. Leo leaned forward, a spark of his old, analytical self cutting through the grief. Then it's a machine, a very sophisticated, cruel machine. It has an input, a secret, and a desired output, chaos, control, completion, whatever. You gave it a corrupted input, an illogical one. He tapped the page with his own secret, so it recalibrated. It created a new output. It didn't try to process your corruption. It used the corruption to create a new problem for you. Me. His analysis was chillingly accurate. The Codex was adaptive, maliciously intelligent. What happens now? He asked, looking from the book to me. You have my fragment. It has yours. What is its next move? As if on cue, the pages of the Codex stirred. Not a violent rustle, but a slow, deliberate turn. It moved past Leo's page, past the blurred page about Mark, to a fresh, creamy sheet. The black ink began to flow, not in a list, not in a single secret. It began to write a rule. Principle of acquisition. A secret unsealed must flow. A truth known to two belongs to none. To restore order, a greater truth must be seeded. Leo and I read it, then reread it. The legalistic language forming a cold knot in my stomach. It's a transaction, I breathed. It exposed your secret to me. Now, order is disrupted. To fix the balance, someone has to give up a bigger secret. Leo finished. His face was ashen. A greater truth. The Codex was no longer just exposing secrets. It was running an economy, a barter system of pain. It had created a debt, and now it demanded payment. The ink continued, writing the terms of the trade. Current imbalance. Leo's grief, unspoken, revealed to Elara. Resolution required. A truth of equivalent or greater mass must be entered into the record by sunrise. Failure to comply. The imbalance will be corrected systemically. Systematically, Leo echoed. What does that mean? I had a terrible idea. It means it won't just tell a secret. It will enforce the correction. Maybe make it public. Send it to everyone in the building. Post it online. The image of Leo's private mourning, splashed across social media, made me physically ill. This is my fault, I said. I provoked it. No, Leo said, his voice firm. It chose this. It chose me as the lever to move you. He looked at me, his old eyes sharp. It wants you to keep playing, to keep feeding it. You tried to stop, so it changed the game. It made you responsible for someone else. He was right. This was the dangerous confrontation promised at the act's start. The Codex had retaliated by writing a truth about someone else, and now it was forcing the choice. Become the monster who feeds it, or let an innocent person be destroyed. We could refuse, I said, the idea desperate. We could burn it. Leo gave a slow, sad shake of his head. He pointed to the last line, systematic correction. I don't think it's a bluff, and I don't think fire would work on something like this. He sighed, a sound that seemed to come from the bottom of his ears, a greater truth. The air in the room changed. The shared peril had fused into a pact. We were two people shackled to the same cursed artifact. It can't be my secret, I said. It has to be bigger than yours. It has to be someone else's. The monster's path was clear. To protect Leo, I would have to find and sacrifice another person's hidden world. Leo stood up, squaring his shoulders. No. What? I have lived with my truth for 1,842 days. I can bear it being known. What I cannot bear. He looked at me and his gaze was fierce. Protective. Now, is watching a good person turn into a predator to save an old man from embarrassment. That is a price too high. Leo, it says systematic correction. Let it correct, he said, a sudden, surprising heat in his voice. Let it tell the world I miss my wife. Let it tell them I talk to a stone. The shame is not in the grief, Elara. The shame would be in letting this thing make us cool. He walked to the table and glared down at the Codex as if it were a stubborn carburetor. You want a greater truth? Fine. I'll give you one. Before I could stop him, he grabbed the ornate pen. "Leo, don't. You don't know what it'll do." "I know exactly what it will do," he said calmly. "It will take what I give it." He bent over the book next to the written rule. His hand, which had sketched blueprints and held his wife's hand, moved with deliberate, steady grace. He didn't write a secret. He wrote a confession. The greater truth. I am not angry that Sarah died. I am angry that she left me alone. And for that anger, I have never forgiven myself. He put the pen down. The Codex drank the words. The ink sank deep, glowing faintly for a moment. The ledger on the page shifted. Current imbalance, resolved. Truth entered. Self-judgment. Mass, sufficient. Then below it, a new line formed. Principle established. Willing sacrifice bears greater mass than stolen secret. Protocol updated. Leo had done it. He hadn't given it a secret. He'd given it a sacrifice. A piece of his own soul, willingly offered. And it had satisfied the machine in a way a stolen truth hadn't. He staggered back a step, as if the act had cost him physical strength. I caught his arm, guiding him back to the chair. Why? I whispered. Why would you do that? He looked up at me, exhausted but clear-eyed. Because you showed me how. You fed it your messy heart. That confused it. I fed it my shame. That nourished it differently. He took a deep, shuddering breath. It doesn't just want facts, Elara. It wants the weight, the guilt, the sin. That's the greater truth. That's the fuel. The Codex lay between us, quiescent. The immediate threat was over. Leo had paid my debt. But the victory was ashes. A good man had just gouged a deeper hole in his own heart to protect me from becoming a monster. He had shown me the real battleground. It wasn't about hiding truths or exposing them. It was about what you were willing to destroy, someone else or yourself, to keep the truth contained. The war for the nature of truth was no longer abstract. Leo had just fought the first skirmish, and he had lost a piece of himself to win it. Outside the window, the first gray light of dawn touched the sky. Sunrise. The deadline had passed. We had complied. But as the new light seeped into my apartment, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a ceasefire. The Codex had its new data, its updated protocol. It knew we could be manipulated through care for each other. It had learned how to hurt us more efficiently. And in the cold morning light, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next secret it demanded would be worse, and the choice it forced would be unimaginable. The silence after sunrise was different. Not the stunned silence of the Codex's confusion, nor the tense silence of its threat. This was the hollow, echoing quiet of a battlefield after the truce is called. The air still smelled of ozone and spent emotion. Leo looked emptied. The act of writing his deepest shame into the Codex hadn't just been a transaction. It had been an amputation. He stared at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. "It's not finished," he said, not looking at me. His voice was flat. It got a taste of something new, something richer. What does that mean? It means we taught it a new way to hurt us. Leo said, finally pushing himself up from the chair. He moved like his bones ached. It used to just want secrets. Now it knows some secrets are heavier when they're given, not taken. It will want more gifts. He looked at me, his old eyes weary. You can't stay here, Elara. The practicality of his statement jarred me. What? This place, this apartment, it's a crime scene now. The book is here. It has a connection to you, to this location. It will pull more people in. It will use you as bait. He spoke with the grim certainty of an engineer diagnosing a structural flaw. The next imbalance won't be with your kindly old neighbor. It will be with a stranger, or someone you love, and the greater truth it demands will be worse. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. He was right. The Codex's retaliation had been precise, surgical. It had identified my vulnerability, my decency, and exploited it perfectly. It would do it again, with more efficiency. Where would I go? The question was pathetic. Somewhere without connections, a motel, a cabin, anywhere you are a ghost. He walked to the window, looking out at the waking city. But you have to take it with you. You can't leave it here for some delivery person or landlord to find. The thought of being alone in a sterile room with the Codex was a special kind of horror. But the thought of it falling into unknowing hands was apocalyptic. And then what? I asked, a spike of frustration cutting through my fear. I just live with it? Feed it my sins until there's nothing left? Wait for it to ask for a truth so great I have to jump off a bridge to pay it? Leo turned from the window. No. Then you learn its rules. All of them. You became a scribe. Now you must become an archivist. You must catalog it. He gestured to a small worn notebook on my counter, next to a grocery list. You need to document everything. Every word it writes. Every principle it states. The conditions under which it acts. The delay between stimulus and response. Its transactional logic. You find the patterns, the loopholes, the triggers. He was talking about reverse engineering a demon. But he was also, for the first time since he'd entered, sounding like himself, a problem solver, said. It's a system, Elara, a terrible living system. And every system has a purpose. Inputs, outputs, and a failure state. We've seen its purpose, to be complete. We've seen one of its inputs, willingly sacrifice truth. We need to find the others, and we need to find what constitutes a failure for it. How do you make a book of ultimate truth fail? I asked, the absurdity of the task washing over me. You give it a paradox, he said simply. You give it something that breaks its logic so completely, it has to shut down. You gave it emotional chaos, and it stalled. That was a minor system error. We need to find the fatal one. Hope, thin and dangerous, flickered. It wasn't a plan to win. It was a plan to study the enemy. It was something to do. We? I asked. He smiled, a faint, sad ghost of an expression. I'm already in the ledger. My truth is in its pages. My pain is part of its final shape. I'm invested. The smile faded. And you shouldn't do this alone. It will use isolation against you. He was offering to walk into the abyss with me. The debt I owed him deepened, becoming a chasm I could never fill. Okay, I whispered. Okay, we archive the archive. I packed a bag with trembling hands. Clothes, toiletries, cash. Leo insisted I take his old, sturdy duffel bag, less conspicuous than a suitcase. I placed the Codex inside, wrapped in a thick sweater, feeling like I was transporting a radioactive core. As I zipped the bag shut, the Codex stirred. It wasn't a physical movement. It was a pressure change, a drop in temperature. Then, a single resonant thump from within the bag, as if a heavy heart had beaten once. Leo and I froze. A sensation, not a sound, filled the room. A pulling, a directional yearning. It wasn't coming from the Codex. It was coming through it, from somewhere else. A faint, psychic tugging, like a compass needle twitching toward a hidden north. "Do you feel that?" I breathed. Leo nodded, his face pale. "It's calling, or being called." The Codex thumped again, more insistently. The pull strengthened, pointing unmistakably east, toward the old city, toward the river and the decaying industrial district. Principle of convergence. Fragments seek wholeness. Sources of significant mass create gravity. A primary nexus is detected. The words didn't appear on a page. They simply formed in my mind, in the Codex's elegant script, etched directly onto my consciousness. I gasped, clutching my head. Leo staggered, grabbing the table. "It's in my head," I choked out. "Mine too," Leo rasped. "A primary nexus, another source, another book. Not book, foundation." The correction was immediate, icy, and absolute. The pulling sensation became an urgent, magnetic drag. The Codex in the bag was no longer an object. It was a passenger, desperate to reach its destination, to reach the other half of itself. This changed everything. It wasn't just a lone artifact. It was part of a set. There was a foundation. And if the Codex was a collector of fragments, the foundation was what they were meant to be assembled upon. The war wasn't just about protecting secrets anymore. It was about preventing a convergence. "We can't go to a motel," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We have to follow this. We have to find the nexus before whatever its calling does." Leo looked at me, and I saw the calculation in his eyes. The risk was geometrically greater. We would be walking toward the heart of the storm, not away from it, but we would also be moving from defense to reconnaissance. We might find answers. We might find a way to break the system for good. He gave a single, firm nod. Then we follow the pull. We left my apartment as the city proper woke up. Two ghosts with a god in a duffel bag. We used cash for a cab, directing the driver east, until the feeling became so strong. It was a physical pressure behind my eyes. We got out in a district of converted warehouses and forgotten factories, the air smelling of rust and damp concrete. The pull led us down an alley to a rusted metal door set into a brick wall beside a shuttered textile mill. A faded, illegible sign hung crookedly above it. The door was locked with a heavy chain, but the padlock was new. The Codex's thrumming was a vibration in my bones now. It was here, behind this door. The foundation resides where the first lie was buried, the stone upon which the city was built. Leo found a loose brick and with a grimace smashed the padlock. The sound was shockingly loud in the silent alley. We hesitated, listening for sirens, for shouts. Nothing. I pushed the heavy door open. Darkness, and the smell of earth, old stone, and something else. Ozone, and the sweet rotten scent of decaying flowers. We stepped inside. Our phone flashlights cut beams through the black. We were in a low, vaulted chamber, a forgotten cellar or crypt. And in the center of the room, on a crude stone plinth, sat the foundation. It wasn't a book. It was a slab. A rectangular stone tablet, roughly the size of a coffee table, its surface perfectly smooth and polished to a mirror black finish. On its surface, faint silver lines glowed, a circuit board of truth, a schematic of connections. At its center was a shallow, codex-shaped indentation. It was an altar, and it was waiting for its scripture. The pulling stopped. The codex in my bag fell utterly, profoundly silent. The hungry hum was gone, replaced by a terrifying sense of arrival. I slowly unzipped the bag. The codex lay there, dark and quiet. But as I looked at the foundation, I understood. This was the final shape. The codex was the pen. The foundation was the page. Together, they would write the unedited, complete history of everything. Every secret, every shame, every buried lie, into the bedrock of reality itself. This wasn't about exposing secrets. It was about rewriting the world with truth as the only law. A world with no privacy, no mercy, no forgiveness. A world of absolute, unbearable exposure. Leo's hand found my arm, his grip tight. "Don't move," he whispered. But it was too late. The foundation's silver lines brightened. Light pulsed from the slab, and words began to form in the air above it, composed of dust and light. "Welcome, scribe. Welcome, sacrifice. The final truth awaits. Place the fragment. Complete the circuit." The choice was upon me, more final than any before. I could refuse. I could turn and run, take the codex and flee. But the foundation was awake now. It would call other fragments, create other imbalances, until the world was a chaotic storm of forced confessions. And it would always, always pull me back. Or I could approach. I could place the codex into the indentation. I could complete the circuit and see, once and for all, what the final truth truly was. I would learn everything, and in doing so, I would unleash it. Leo's truth was in the codex. My truths, Mark's, countless others, we would all be part of the foundational record of a new, horrifically honest world. I looked at Leo. He didn't plead. He didn't advise. He simply stood beside me, a fellow prisoner in the dungeon of truth, waiting for my decision. He had already sacrificed his shame. Now, the ultimate sacrifice was mine to make. I hefted the codex in my hands. It felt heavier than the world. I took a step toward the foundation. A woman who discovers a book that writes people's darkest secrets must master its cruel transactional logic and prevent its convergence with a foundational artifact, or witness the birth of a world where every truth is exposed and every secret is a currency. If you were in Elara's place, standing before the foundation with the codex in your hands, would you complete the circuit to learn the final truth? Or would you try to destroy it, knowing both choices could unleash unimaginable consequences? And so, another story finds its place by the fireside. I hope it kept you company, whether on a long road, during a quiet evening, or in the moments you needed a story to step into. This has been a Heartlight Saga, and there are always more secrets to uncover. If this journey stayed with you, if you felt the chill or the mystery settle in, I would be so grateful if you'd let me know. Leave a comment below and tell me, what part of the story lingered with you the longest? Your thoughts not only mean the world to me, but they help shape the tales I tell next. Like the video, share with someone who might like the story, and subscribe the channel, Heartlight Saga. And if you're yearning for another story right now, the story doesn't have to end. I have another tale waiting for you. From my hearth to yours, thank you for listening. Until the next story begins.